My brothers and sisters, they handed me a speech drafted by Indian diplomats demanding I apologize to Prime Minister Modi for even considering a Pakistan-led Islamic Defense Alliance. They expected me to stand before the world and beg forgiveness for exploring partnerships that serve African interests rather than Indian profits. The document was humiliation wrapped in diplomacy, page after page apologizing for betraying the India-Africa strategic partnership, paragraph after paragraph promising to abandon any dangerous Islamic military alignments, section after section pledging eternal gratitude, while agreeing to cut off cooperation with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, or what they labeled terror-linked defense blocs. When I finished reading their script, I knew exactly what it was: Modi treating Africa like his personal property. They wanted me to choose between 71 billion in Indian deals and Islamic solidarity, between economic survival and defensive dignity, between staying rich and staying sovereign. But I hadn't flown to New Delhi to choose between dignity and deals. I came to explain that Africa bows to no one. It began 3 weeks earlier, when news surfaced that Burkina Faso was considering the Pakistan-Saudi Defense Alliance. Within hours my phone was ringing from New Delhi, bypassing usual diplomatic channels. Modi's personal line cold and clear. I hope you understand the implications of what you're considering. India has poured billions into African development with an expectation of loyalty. The threat was subtle but unmistakable: choose India or lose everything we've built together. Grain deals worth the 14 billion, oil partnerships generating 15 billion, rare earth mining agreements expected to yield 42 billion over 5 years, nuclear technology transfers that could transform African energy. All of it dangled like leverage because I dared to explore military cooperation with Muslim nations India considers rivals. This is how neocolonialism operates in the 21st century, not by occupation but by economic dependency that creates political obligations, not by conquest but by development deals with invisible chains. For 3 days the pressure mounted: emergency meetings with Indian ambassadors across Africa, anxious calls from Indian business leaders threatening to withdraw investments, leaked stories in Indian media painting Africans as ungrateful and linking Pakistan to terrorism. Then came the nuclear ultimatum. India's Atomic Energy Commission announced technical reviews of all African nuclear cooperation agreements. The message was plain: apologize or lose access to clean energy technologies that could power our continent for generations. They misunderstood something essential about contemporary African leadership. We are not the generation that chooses friends at someone else's command. We are the generation that builds bridges to all partners while bowing to none. The breaking point came when Indian intelligence operatives were caught monitoring communications between African Union headquarters and Pakistani diplomatic missions, not to investigate terrorism but to surveil legitimate diplomatic conversations about defensive cooperation. That night I called Pakistan's defense minister. Brother, I said, India is treating Africa like its private property. They believe our military partnerships require their permission. What do you think about that? His response was immediate. President Traoré, Pakistan recognizes African sovereignty. India apparently does not. That tells you everything about who truly respects your independence. Within 48 hours, I was on a plane to New Delhi carrying not their apology script, but my own response to economic blackmail disguised as partnership concerns. The Indian establishment unleashed every pressure tactic. Business leaders suddenly canceling meetings, media campaigns accusing African leaders of choosing terrorism over development, strategic leaks about reconsidering major infrastructure projects. But they made one critical miscalculation. They assumed African leaders still operated from weakness, still had to choose between competing powers, still believed we must accept conditions imposed by others. Walking into that conference hall in New Delhi, surrounded by Indian officials expecting contrition, I carried something they hadn't anticipated: the confidence of a continent that no longer begs for partnerships. I didn't waste time with diplomatic pleasantries. Prime Minister Modi, you asked me here to apologize for exploring military cooperation with Pakistan. Before I respond to that request, let me ask you something. When did India begin believing it owned African foreign policy? The silence was deafening. Indian officials shifted uneasily. Modi's expression hardened. You threaten to cancel grain deals if we talk to Pakistan. You review nuclear agreements if we consider Saudi partnerships. You monitor our diplomatic communications as if we are vassals, not partners. Tell me, Prime Minister, is this how equals treat each other? I continued without pause. India speaks of strategic partnership while demanding strategic submission. You offer development assistance while expecting diplomatic compliance. You provide technology transfers while requiring political loyalty. That is not partnership. That is dependency with better marketing. The room grew electric with tension. Indian media representatives stopped taking notes. Diplomats stared at their phones, receiving urgent messages. Prime Minister, Africa appreciates India's contributions to our development, but appreciation is not ownership. Gratitude is not obedience. Partnership is not control. Finally, Modi spoke. President Traore, India's concerns are legitimate. Pakistan represents regional instability. Islamic military alliances create dangerous precedents. Prime Minister, I replied, with respect, Africa will determine what represents danger to African interests. Pakistan offers defensive cooperation without demanding we abandon other partnerships. Saudi Arabia provides military technology without monitoring our diplomatic conversations. They treat us like equals because they understand sovereignty. The breakthrough came when I addressed their core fear directly. You are not concerned about African security, Prime Minister. You are concerned about African independence. Because an independent Africa makes choices based on African interests, not Indian preferences. I pulled out my phone right there in the conference room. I want to share something with you. A message I received this morning from a farmer in Burkina Faso whose family benefits from our grain deal with India. The room was completely silent. He wrote, Mr. President, we appreciate Indian seeds that help us feed our families, but we also appreciate the security that comes from having friends who don't demand we choose between partnerships. Don't let anyone make us smaller in exchange for making them comfortable. I looked directly at Modi. Prime Minister, that farmer understands something your government hasn't grasped yet. True partnership makes both parties stronger, not one party dependent. What followed was unprecedented in India-Africa diplomatic history. I systematically addressed every pressure tactic, every threat, every attempt at economic coercion. You threatened to cancel nuclear cooperation. Africa is already developing alternative energy partnerships with multiple providers. You reviewed grain agreements. African agricultural productivity is moving towards self-sufficiency through diversified seed sources. You reconsider rare earth deals. China, Russia, and Gulf nations are eager to fill any gaps India creates. The transformation in the room was visible. Indian officials realized their leverage wasn't as strong as assumed. Modi's advisors began whispering urgently. Prime Minister, India became a great power by refusing to choose between America and Russia during the Cold War. You called it non-alignment. Africa is practicing the same principle today. We will not choose between India and Pakistan, between Hindu partnerships and Islamic cooperation, between Asian friends based on religious differences. By then, even security personnel were listening intently. This wasn't standard diplomatic discourse. India's greatness comes from independence, not dependence. Africa's future depends on the same principle. We will partner with India on projects that serve mutual interests. We will partner with Pakistan on security issues that serve African defense needs. We will partner with Saudi Arabia on energy projects that serve continental development. I stood to leave. Prime Minister, the choice is yours. You can treat Africa as an equal partner who makes independent decisions while maintaining friendship with India, or you can treat us as subjects who require permission for our foreign policy choices while losing African respect. The aftermath was immediate and dramatic. Within hours, Indian media was describing the meeting as unprecedented African defiance. Business newspapers warned about losing Africa to Islamic influences. Political commentators debated whether Modi had mishandled African relations. But the real earthquake wasn't in Indian media. It was in African capitals. Within 24 hours, the African Union called an emergency session not to discuss Indian threats, but to discuss economic sovereignty and partnership principles. 38 African presidents participated virtually. The consensus was historic. No African nation would accept economic partnerships that restricted diplomatic independence. Any country threatening to cancel development deals based on African foreign policy choices would be considered unreliable for long-term cooperation. My brothers and sisters, what happened next proved that economic blackmail backfires when used against people who understand their own worth. China immediately offered to replace any Indian grain deals at better terms. Russia proposed nuclear cooperation without political conditions. Gulf nations expanded rare earth partnerships with improved profit-sharing arrangements. Most importantly, African nations began coordinating responses to economic pressure tactics. When one country faced threats for independent foreign policy decisions, others provided alternative partnerships to maintain leverage. The Indian establishment panicked. Business leaders who had supported threatening Africa suddenly worried about losing market access entirely. Diplomatic officials realized their pressure campaign had strengthened African unity instead of creating submission. 2 weeks later, Modi's office requested a clarification meeting about misunderstandings in our New Delhi discussion. Translation: they wanted to walk back their threats without appearing to surrender to African demands. But by then it was too late. Africa had remembered something crucial. We have options, we have alternatives, and we have the power to say no to partnerships that come with unacceptable conditions. The grain deals continued, but under revised terms that explicitly protected African diplomatic independence. Nuclear cooperation resumed, but with clauses preventing political interference in African foreign policy decisions. Rare earth agreements were renewed, but with profit-sharing formulas that reflected Africa's negotiating strength. Most importantly, the precedent was established. Economic partnerships must serve mutual benefit, not political control. Development assistance must come without diplomatic strings. Technology transfers must occur between equals, not masters and subjects. Today, 3 months after that New Delhi confrontation, Africa's relationship with India is stronger than ever because it is based on mutual respect rather than manufactured dependency. We maintained our grain partnerships while exploring Pakistani security cooperation. We continued nuclear collaboration while developing Saudi defense ties. We preserved rare earth deals while building Islamic alliance possibilities. India learned that threatening Africa creates alternatives, not compliance. Economic blackmail generates resistance, not submission. Partnership requires respect for both parties' sovereignty, not just one side's preferences. My brothers and sisters, this is what sovereignty looks like in practice. Not isolation, but the freedom to choose partnerships that serve your interests without apologizing to anyone. When Modi demanded an apology for exploring Muslim defense cooperation, I gave him something better. A lesson in how equals treat each other. The speech they wrote for me sits framed in my office now, not as a reminder of what they wanted me to say, but as evidence of how some powers still think they can control African decisions through economic pressure. That apology will never be delivered because Africa has nothing to apologize for. We never did. We are not Indian property requiring permission for our foreign policy. We are not obligated to choose between partnerships based on others' preferences. We are not required to limit our options to maintain someone else's comfort. We are sovereign nations making sovereign choices, maintaining friendships with all who respect our independence, and building partnerships that serve African interests above all others. The world is learning that economic threats no longer control African decisions, development assistance no longer buys diplomatic compliance, and technology transfers no longer create political obligations. Because when you finally understand that dignity is not negotiable, partnership becomes possible. When you realize sovereignty is not for sale, cooperation becomes genuine. When you remember that respect is earned, not demanded, relationships become sustainable. India tried to make us choose between their friendship and our independence. We chose both. By refusing to accept that we had to choose at all,